Welcome everyone to another episode of our How Can I Help You Right Now live webinar series. Today I'm joined by the lovely Jamelle Lindo, and he will be taking us through the topic, the EQ leader in Industry 4.0. So for some people reading this title, they might be wondering, what's EQ? And are we really in an Industry 4.0? And the answer to the latter question is yes, we are potentially 4.0, maybe even 4.5. Jamelle, at this point, post-COVID, right? We've kicked it up a notch. But in today's presentation, we want to really, zero in on emotional intelligence, and how that impacts you as a leader in Industry 4.0. So before we go too far in, I want to just highlight our event co-producers. So we've got Startup Peel, powered by Startup Canada, Aldine Smith Consulting, an HR and business consulting firm, Enunciate, AI-powered language testing, and ITS Global, recruiting and staffing providers. So just a quick about who am I and why we started this series. So as we approach the post-COVID era, we wanted to provide very practical and actionable resources for startups and small business owners to really help them navigate what work would look like after the pandemic. And so we created this series. And I'm a transformation business coach with over a decade of experience in HR, operations, and strategy, supporting these same businesses, startups, scale-ups, and small to medium-sized businesses. I've earned the title of a trusted advisor from business owners as a result of my ability to combine strategy, planning, and action to create real results. And today I'm joined by our guest, Jamelle Lindo, who is an emotional intelligence leadership coach. And if you're not 100% sure what that is, I encourage you to connect with Jamelle on LinkedIn and book a consultation with him and really find out how you can leverage emotional intelligence in your leadership role. So he is a leadership coach, trainer, and speaker with over 11 years of diverse learning and development experience, and is also an official member of the Forbes Coaches Council. Jamelle is certified in the world's leading assessment tool for measuring emotional intelligence called EQ-I 2.0, and he uses this to establish a scientifically valid benchmark to begin the development journey as a coach. He has worked with thousands of professionals across Canada to help them level up through practical application of emotional intelligence and mindfulness-based strategies. And on that note, I want to hand over to our guest today, Jamelle Lindo. Thanks, Jamelle.
Aldine, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And as always, it is a complete pleasure to collaborate with you and bring this information forward. For those who are listening, and maybe this is your first time hearing about emotional intelligence, really what I want for you to walk away with is some form of context into what emotional intelligence really means and how it applies to what you do in your day-to-day, especially if you're a leader, professional, whatever the case may be. So as I go through, really think about that. Think about what this means for you, and also what this can mean for your coworkers, your peers, your direct reports, and so on. And if you can have that lens, you'll really walk away with the most amount of value, and that's really my intention. So before we kind of jump off, I just want to introduce the three areas that I'm going to be covering with you. The first thing I'm going to be doing is talking about the landscape of the modern world, right? So where do we find ourselves today? What's happening today? What are some of the things in our environment that we need to pay attention to? And then how does that link into this whole idea of emotionally intelligent leadership? From there, I'll transition to part two, which is an introduction to emotional intelligence. What is it? What does it mean? How do I use it? What does it look like? All of that good stuff. And then I want to close off on some really simple strategies that you can use to start to implement this, not only individually, but also within your organization, if you see where there's a potential for you to take some of this learning inside. And if you go walk away with three things: number one, the ability to be able to define emotional intelligence, self-awareness; number two, to describe how EI relates to just daily workplace situations; and number three, walk away with 2 to 3 strategies, then you are in a great position. So let's start by just thinking about the modern world. Where do we find ourselves today? And I think we find ourselves in one of the most interesting positions that we've been in a very long time, and maybe one of the most unique situations that we've been in ever. And this was true before COVID, before the pandemic, but it's even more true now given that this situation in many ways has kind of catapulted and accelerated us into this digital world that was here and was always coming, but now seems to be here much faster than it would have been otherwise. And so, we have webinars like this one that we're joining right now. Likely you probably have Zoom fatigue because all of your meetings are happening over Zoom. And the whole dynamic of the way that we work has been significantly transformed in a relatively short period of time. We're talking 2 months because of something totally unexpected. And if you think back to just 3 months ago when everything was normal, there's no way that we could have called a situation like this. And so the unique opportunity that presents itself here is that certain things become very obvious to us. And one of those things is really the importance and the need for emotional intelligence, which I'll come to later on. But right now, I want to talk about some of the other things that are shifting and changing our environment and the way that we interact and engage with one another. And if you take a look at the screen, you can see that I have some examples here, some very popular companies that have revolutionized the way that we do everyday things like watching movies. That experience has been totally revolutionized by Netflix. It is very different from what would have been a regular trip to the Blockbuster store. Those don't exist anymore, right? The way that we transport ourselves, right? Literally, transportation is different today because instead of taking the taxi, maybe you're taking an Uber. And we have to remember that the taxi industry, relatively undisturbed for the last century, now is really having a deep challenge with that. And what's interesting is on top of that, with the pandemic, now Uber is having a difficult time with their technology and their company. And so all of these changes are rapidly evolving our environment, and we are suddenly forced to adapt and change. The last example is Amazon and Sears, or Amazon and really any other retailer. Amazon being one of the largest retailers on the planet, yet they don't have a physical retail presence. So it's very interesting. Think about that, right? One of the largest retailers on the planet. It's crazy. And we know how much money is spent online in America. Tons, millions of dollars spent online every single year, if not billions. And $1 of $3 spent online in America is spent through Amazon. That's the degree of the market share that they have, yet no physical retail presence, right? We have the emergence of technologies like AR and VR and blockchain and social media and the Internet of Things and smart technology and artificial intelligence. All of these incredible technologies are emerging, now being accelerated through the environment that we're experiencing, known as COVID-19. I'm sure much of this will stay even after the pandemic has passed. So we're seeing this rapid change of the environment, and we're being forced to adapt, to evolve, to change, to grow, to develop, really to do whatever we need to do to meet these new needs. And so this is a quote from Andrew. He's the founder of Coursera, which is an online digital learning platform. He says, artificial intelligence will be as transformative for us as electricity was for our ancestors. So if you remember the blackout that we have, I believe it was 2007 or 2009, you remember just how different life was for a few days with no electricity. And if you really understand the gravity of that, then you can begin to understand what artificial intelligence is going to do for our lives and the way we engage not only with each other, but in our jobs and really every facet of culture today. And so Industry 4.0 touches on all these things. More specifically, it refers to a new phase of the Industrial Revolution that focuses heavily on interconnectivity, automation, machine learning, and real-time data. So the question we have to ask ourselves now is, what skills will leaders need in order to successfully navigate these periods of digital transformation in Industry 4.0? Now, lucky for you, the World Economic Forum did a Future of Jobs report where they investigated this question. And what they were looking to do is identify the top 10 workplace skills that you will need in order to be successful in this digital transformation. And essentially, this is the list that they came up with. So this is the top 10 skills that you will need as a professional, given this rapid environmental change that we are all experiencing right now. So if you take a look, you'll notice that a lot of these skills are actually very similar, right? Of course, emotional intelligence is on here. I don't think it'd be on here if I wasn't on here, so I gotta make sure that I highlight that in yellow. One of the key important skills, but what's more significant even that, is when you take a look at this list, all of this bubbles down really, truly to only 2 skills. It's a list of 10, but if you look close enough, it's really only 2 things. Number 1, it's your ability to be able to think. And number 2, it's your ability to be able to deal with people. All right, now this is very important because essentially what we're saying is that the key to the future is in how you think and in how you engage others. So your ability to be able to make decisions, particularly in stressful situations, right? Problem solving, your ability to be flexible in your thoughts, right? The strategy that you had pre-pandemic is not the strategy that you're rolling with now. And the strategy that you've created now may not be the strategy that you roll with post-pandemic. So the ability to be able to be flexible there is very important. Then we have creativity and critical thinking. So your ability to be able to assess things and be creative and be innovative. Then what enables all of these things is your ability to then coordinate with others, to work in a team. Now we're all stuck in these little digital boxes. I'm in a little digital box right now, on a little digital screen where you're watching this, right? But our teams using these kinds of technologies still need to engage, still need to communicate, still need to interact, still need to be able to be effective in what they do. So what does that look like? How do you coordinate in this new world? Right? Then there's people management. We still have to manage our people in and around all this. We still have to provide service to our clients, to our customers. And then on top of that, sales doesn't disappear. We still need to be able to have sales conversations, and we still need to be able to negotiate, which is another one of these skills. And so this is an interesting quote from Ed Hess, the professor of the University of Virginia. And he says, in an age of smart machines, our old definition of what it means to be smart doesn't make sense. What is needed is a new definition of smart, one that promotes higher levels of human thinking and emotional engagement. And this is really where we get into the idea of emotional intelligence and what it is. So what is emotional intelligence? Well, I want to start off by telling you what it's not. A lot of people have all of these diluted ideas about what emotional intelligence is. So I like to start with what it is not. So the first thing is, it's not just about being nice to everybody. There's always this fear that when you start to incorporate emotional intelligence into leadership development or into your workplace, that you're going to walk into your workplace one day and everybody's going to be dressed like hippies singing Kumbaya and no work is going to get done, right? But that couldn't be further from the truth, because emotional intelligence, although includes your ability to be courteous and kind, also involves many other skills. And if I were to break it down to the most fundamental explanation of what it is, I would just say that it is a fundamental people skill. Point blank, period. That's what it is. Why is it a fundamental people skill? Because people are driven by emotion. So if you don't understand emotion, then you don't understand people. And it really is that simple. More officially, though, emotional intelligence, or EI, refers to your ability to use and manage emotions purposefully, yours and others. Now, even this definition is very wide and is very broad, and I'm going to funnel it down into the different areas of what this truly means. But before I get there, I want to talk about why it matters. So here are some of the numbers and stats. These have been published by Harvard Business Review, by Forbes. A lot of this was done by Talent Smart, who provides emotional intelligence solutions. And I want to start here so that you understand why it matters. One of the reasons why it matters, one of the key reasons, what they found in the research is that 90% of top performers are also high in EQ. Think about that. If you're a high performer, if you know a high performer, if you've hired a high performer, if you've lost a high performer from your organization, there's a 90% chance that that person is also high in EQ. Okay? Now, let's move on. Out of 33 workplace skills, EQ was the strongest predictor of success, accounting for 58% of a person's job performance. Okay, employees who had managers with high EQ were 4 times less likely to leave than those with low EQ. That ties into another one, which I'll get into a little bit later, but let's talk a little bit about money. Those with higher emotional intelligence make an average of $29,000 more than those with low emotional intelligence per year. Could you use an extra 29,000? I think we all could. Let's move on to the next one. EQ is 4 times more likely to predict career success. That was in a research study done with professionals or professors at the university. And the next one, in senior leadership roles, EI makes up about 80 to 90% of the differentiating competencies. So you might be wondering, what are differentiating competencies? And that's really what I want to talk about next. Because you may be thinking to yourself, Jamelle, I get it. EQ is important. Emotional intelligence is important. People skills is important. I was going to say soft skills. I don't think these are soft skills. I think they're hard skills, right? Those things are important. But Jamelle, what about my technical knowledge? What about my job knowledge? What about my experience? What about my education? What about my IQ? And I'm going to tell you, all of those things matter. And never listen to anybody who tells you that they don't matter. They absolutely do. But once you cross that threshold and you have the job knowledge, the education, right, the understanding of the role from a technical standpoint, then you have to ask yourself, what makes you any different from the person right beside you who has the exact same experience, the exact same education, and the exact same job knowledge? Well, now we're talking about differentiating competencies. These are things like how you deal with conflict. These are things like how you connect with and mobilize teams, how you negotiate, how you build relationships, whether or not you're able to create trust between people. How do you deal with stress? What do you do when the unexpected happens, when a pandemic hits? How do you show up in the midst of that? Those are the skills that are going to differentiate you from the person beside you who looks identical to you on paper. And the answer is emotional intelligence. So think of these things again as the entry-level skills, right? Think of them as the threshold skills. Understand that they are important, but once you have them, now we need to know what makes you different, and that is your EQ. So another common misconception that people have about emotional intelligence is that it is one skill or one ability, when the reality is that it's actually an umbrella term that refers to many skills that all tie in to your emotion, as well as the emotions of other people. So things like optimism, your ability to be able to see a situation for what it is, but recognize what the opportunities are, what the positives are, these kinds of things. Your ability to be confident, right? So to show up and feel self-empowered to generate that, for that to be something that exists in and of yourself, not something that you depend on somebody else for, right? Your ability to just believe in your capacity to get a job done, to accomplish a task, right? All of that ties into confidence, which is an emotional intelligence skill. I talked a little bit about stress tolerance. Think about the situation that we're in right now. Would you describe it as a stressful situation? I think that you would, and most of us would. And the reality is that that is the case. A pandemic is stressful. But a pandemic doesn't mean that our responsibilities disappear. It doesn't mean that we can stop being parents and stop being leaders and that our clients no longer need us and the services and products that we provide to them. It doesn't mean any of those things. In fact, we still have to deliver, even though we're in the middle of a pandemic and even though it's a very stressful time. What does that look like? That's the skill that you will need in order to find success in a moment like this, right? Relationship skills, so being able to build and have meaningful, relationships with the people that we work with, or even in our personal lives, all comes down to the different facets of emotional intelligence. So how do we now ground this, right? How do we make it all make sense? And part of it is using a tool called EQI 2.0 to actually measure someone's emotional intelligence, so their skill in all of these areas, in a scientifically valid way. And that's what they've accomplished with the EQI 2.0, which was created by MHS. They are a leading provider of psychometric assessment tools. All of it is science-based. They have 30 years in research doing this. EQI 2.0 is on its second rendition. Tons of research behind this tool, which makes it very valid. And ultimately what you get are all of these different levels in the different areas of EQ that I talked about, which I want for you to really think about as skills. There are different levels, and you want to balance them out. Very much the same way that you balance out the EQ levels in a audio engineering studio, very similar to the picture that I have right here on the screen. And this is the model. And what you'll see here is 5 different skills or 5 different areas. And within each of those areas, there are 3 skills that belong to that particular category, making up 15 different skills in total. Now, why am I emphasizing the word skill? I'm emphasizing that word because some people will misunderstand this as a personality test or as something being fixed. But when you realize that these are skills, then you also realize you can develop and grow in any of these areas, which is where it becomes very exciting. Because if you have low self-confidence, for example, or you are not very good at building effective relationships, you can use very specific strategies that have been proven to enhance your skill in that area. Just like how you could build your skill for playing piano or doing anything, really. That's how I want for you to see this. And to kind of hammer the point home, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a really quick case study to give you a little bit of context into how this works, but also context into how these things balance out and work together, because they're not just isolated. So take a listen here and see if you can identify what emotional intelligence skills are at play. So George is the CEO of a mid-sized trunking company that provides logistics services across Canada. Their goal is not to be the biggest, but to be the best at what they do. At the last team meeting, George had his C-suite leaders present. Among them were Sarah, the CEO, Tim, the CFO, and several other senior leaders with various responsibilities within the company. To be frank, the elephant in the room is that the company is not currently doing well financially. They're 8 months into delivering a strategy that's just not working, and it's clear that a change of direction is necessary. Over the course of the last few months, the team has been trying to help George recognize that it may be time to consider other options. So far, George has been unwilling to make changes and has not truly taken the time to really listen and understand his team. So what are the impacts here? Well, the company is at risk, right? George is potentially damaging relationships with the people on his team. George is not delivering for his clients, so there's also a client impact here in this situation. So there are many things that are being impacted by George's behavior. And the connection here, at least one of the connections, there are many, is that George has an imbalance in his EQ skills. His independence is much higher than his flexibility. So no individual skill is good or bad. It just depends on how balanced your skills are and what you want to accomplish. So in this case, his independence is high because he's able to see things independently, which is a good thing. But when it's in balance with your ability to be able to flex and consider other opinions and other solutions, other options, we run into a situation like the one that I'm describing now. So he would want to develop his flexibility so that it complements his strength of independence, right? Now, I want to briefly go through some strategies with you. So how can you actually look at enhancing your emotional intelligence? At the organizational level, really what you want to do is you want to assess where your culture is, right? So you can do that by doing psychometrics, you can do anonymous surveys, but you want to get a sense for where people are at. And above and beyond that, you also want to look out for red flags, right? So things like high turnover, low morale, low employee engagement, low creativity, high absenteeism, high stress. Like all of these things indicate that you may be dealing with leaders who have low emotional intelligence, which is then funneling out into your culture and negatively impacting it, right? Also, if people are not taking vacation days, it could indicate that they may be stressed. So these are all things that you want to look into at the organizational level. On the individual level, what you can do is you can assess your own EQ right, through various psychometric assessments. But you can also do your own form of internal reflection. And really what that looks like is throughout the day, taking note and taking stock of what your emotional triggers are and why those things emotionally triggered you. And if you build a practice of reflecting on these things over an extended period of time, you'll start to get an idea of who you are, what drives you, what motivates you, and just the awareness. So not even changing the behavior or changing the emotion, but just the awareness will start to give you a really deep sense of control over your state and what you're feeling at any given moment. So simple reflection exercises like that help tremendously to grow your self-awareness and focusing in on what you're experiencing, not necessarily why. That's key. The next thing that you could do is you could do training, right? So you can develop your people to help to cultivate these skills. And along with that also comes one-on-one coaching and development. And what you really want to think about here is you want to liken emotional intelligence development, or what I like to call emotional fitness, to physical fitness. And so if you wanted to get in shape, if you wanted to build muscle, what you'd have to do is set up a plan, right? Go into the gym, do your workouts, do your exercises to really be able to build that muscle over time. So it's a long-term commitment. It's a long-term journey. Emotional intelligence development is the same. You have to have strategies that you're using on a consistent basis, strategies like the one I just shared with you. There are many, right? Over an extended period of time to develop the skill, just like developing the muscle, right? So remember, emotional intelligence development is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And that's really, you know, one of the key ideas I want to make sure that I leave here with you. The other one is that emotions are an incredibly untapped resource in most organizations, but also within most people. It's not something that we've taken significant stock of. We haven't looked at it. We haven't understood it. And for the majority of people, emotions just get the best of us and we deal with them as best we can. We don't have a focused, educated, practical approach to making sure that they work for us instead of against us, which is where you can truly get the added benefit of focusing in and honing in on developing yourself in this way. But where do you start? Let's say you just want to get an idea of what this is. You want to grasp it. What I'd recommend is starting with Daniel Goleman. He is the front runner, the leader in this area, and he's popularized the idea by bringing it into the mainstream through business leadership and professional development. He has a book called Emotional Intelligence. That's the place that I'd recommend that you start. And if there's an interest there, and if you want to undergo the journey, that's where you can look at doing bigger and better things. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamelle. I was fighting with my computer to try to get off mute here. So I do apologize for the delay there. But I wanted to pause and ask if there were any questions in the room at this